The dim glow of the computer screen lit up Pam Bondi's face as she prepared to confront a secret that could change everything. In this moment, everything could collapse, but she didn't flinch. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but because she knew one thing for sure. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, can never stay hidden forever. Pam wasn't just opening a door. She was about to drag an entire shadowy system into the light. What was supposed to be a victory for justice had now become the starting point of an unprecedented battle. She was stepping into danger, but she wasn't alone. By her side was Bruno, a specially trained canine with an extraordinary gift. He could detect electronic signals invisible to the human eye. Every subtle tap of Pam's fingers triggered a chain of events that couldn't be stopped. A listening device was uncovered beneath the defense table of defendant Martin Reyes, and with it, a dark conspiracy began to unravel. Seneca Systems wasn't just trying to influence court cases. They were building a parallel court system designed to control justice itself. Are you ready for the truth? Don't forget to subscribe to Black Footprints and follow this gripping, unpredictable story, where the truth will finally come to light, and those hiding in the shadows will face consequences they never saw coming. Dive into the explosive secrets behind this investigation. You won't be able to look away. In the cold, sterile light of the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse, what was expected to be a routine trial suddenly shifted into high drama. Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, walked into the courtroom with confidence in her stride, but a flicker of unease passed through her eyes. Not out of fear, but because she knew all too well. In situations like this, everything can change in the blink of an eye. She was no stranger to legal battles, but this case, centered around Martin Reyes, a former Department of Defense employee accused of espionage and leaking classified intelligence, was different. This wasn't just a courtroom fight. It was a war between truth and deception, a high-stakes game of mental chess. Pam wasn't fighting this war alone. At her side was Bruno, a loyal German shepherd and elite canine officer, an inseparable part of her security team. With razor-sharp instincts and an uncanny ability to sense danger, Bruno was more than a guard dog. He was family. But today, Bruno had an even greater mission: to detect anything suspicious hidden in plain sight. Trained not just to sniff out bombs or drugs, Bruno possessed a rare skill. He could identify electronic signals invisible to the human eye, a gift that might just tip the scales in the most critical moment of this case. As the trial began, Pam took a seat in the gallery, her eyes locked on Reyes, the man now under the intense scrutiny of the nation. He sat still, expressionless, but the tension in the room was palpable. Every testimony, every question felt like it was being dissected under a microscope. Pam sensed something was off. A nagging feeling crept in, like something was being hidden in plain sight, right here in this courtroom. That's when she gave the signal. A gentle tap on her thigh, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to Bruno, it was crystal clear. He stirred, ears perked, body alert. Most in the room didn't pay attention, assuming the dog was just adjusting. But Pam knew better. That low growl rumbling from Bruno's throat was the sound of something dangerous being uncovered. Pam's eyes narrowed, her face calm, but inside, suspicion swelled like a rising tide. In that moment, Pam realized that her seemingly harmless signal had just cracked open something far more sinister. Bruno wasn't just sniffing the air. He was tracing the scent of a hidden threat. A highly sophisticated listening device had been planted under the defense table where Reyes sat. No one else had noticed. Not yet. The room fell silent, as if the world itself had paused. The judge called for a recess. A chilling quiet took hold as everyone began to sense that they were no longer dealing with a simple court case. They were inside something much bigger, something darker, and none of them had seen it coming. From that moment on, Pam Bondi was no longer just a witness. She had become part of a war against an invisible force, one that operated not in daylight, but in shadows. Every move from here would have to be strategic, because she wasn't just fighting the accused, she was going up against the very forces lurking behind the courthouse walls. the ones who could turn everything upside down with a single move. Pam Bondi couldn't stop replaying the events of that courtroom in her mind. Every detail haunted her, from the unconscious tap of her fingers to Bruno's strange growl. It had all led to the discovery of a secret she never imagined. The listening device found beneath Reyes' defense table wasn't just any ordinary bug. When the technicians examined it closely, what they uncovered was far more disturbing. A piece of advanced military-grade surveillance tech. It had been specifically engineered to collect both audio and video without ever being detected. Unlike anything standard courtroom security had ever seen, this device could transmit data without leaving a trace, nearly invisible, even under expert scrutiny. Pam knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the kind of equipment just anyone could get their hands on. The biggest question now was, who planted it, and why? She couldn't believe Martin Reyes, even with his background at the Department of Defense, could have orchestrated this on his own. Someone had helped him. But who? Refusing to let uncertainty paralyze her, Pam launched into her own investigation. She combed through every document tied to Reyes, digging for any thread that could lead to the mastermind behind the scheme. After days of relentless research, one name surfaced, one she hadn't expected: Seneca Systems. On the surface, the company looked legitimate, a defense contractor offering security and logistical support to federal agencies. But the deeper Pam dug into its records, the more disturbing the truth became. Seneca had ties to international intelligence networks, secretive operations across multiple countries, and financial transactions funneled through shadowy, off-the-books channels. It wasn't just another private firm. It was a rogue force operating beyond the reach of the law. The deeper she went, the more she realized this wasn't just about Reyes. He was a pawn. Seneca Systems had a much larger agenda, and this trial was just the tip of the iceberg. But just as Pam began connecting the dots, a betrayal rocked her to her core. Jake Turner, a longtime friend and colleague from the Department of Justice, was exposed as part of the conspiracy. Jake, someone Pam had trusted for years, who had stood beside her in countless legal battles, hadn't just known about Seneca's operations. He had been helping them, feeding them information, clearing paths for their plans. The betrayal hit Pam like a punch to the gut. The ground beneath her feet felt like it was crumbling. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. How someone so close could be part of something so dark. Pam felt like she'd been dragged into a game with no rules and no way out. But even as the sting of betrayal lingered, she knew she couldn't stop. What she'd uncovered was only the beginning. If she was going to stop whoever was behind Seneca Systems, she had to go deeper into the shadows, facing not only her enemies, but also the people she once called friends. Every step forward, every question asked, every new revelation was a piece of a puzzle far bigger than she could have imagined. And Pam was determined to see the full picture, no matter what it cost her. Pam Bondi had come too far to turn back now. And deep down, she knew every step forward in this investigation was pulling her deeper into a swamp she might never crawl out of. After uncovering the truth behind Seneca Systems, it became clear this wasn't just another defense contractor. Seneca wasn't simply providing cybersecurity or logistical support for classified projects. They had a far more dangerous, far more ambitious goal: total control over judicial data. Pam began to piece it together. Seneca wasn't just chasing military contracts. They were quietly infiltrating the justice system, building a clandestine spy network embedded within the very courts of America. Every trial, every file, every ruling, these weren't just legal records. To Seneca, they were opportunities. The bigger question loomed over Pam like a thundercloud. How could a private company gain such deep, unchecked access to the heart of the national court system? And no one noticed? As Pam dug deeper, new clues surfaced. One of the first was a name she never expected: Dylan Carr, a seemingly unremarkable court clerk. Quiet, well-liked, the kind of person who blended into the background. But Pam's investigation into Carr's financial transactions revealed a different story. Carr wasn't just working with Seneca. She was placing surveillance devices inside high-profile courtrooms, giving Seneca real-time access to confidential proceedings. Carr wasn't a pawn. She was a planted operative in a broader plan to undermine the very foundation of justice. But what shook Pam the most was what she found next, a classified internal document from Seneca. In it, a single name kept appearing, the architect. At first, Pam had no idea who it referred to. But the deeper she read, the more she noticed a pattern. Every major decision, every covert operation, every high-level approval, it all traced back to this shadowy figure. And one name came to mind: Alden Crenshaw, a former director of national intelligence. Crenshaw was a ghost with immense power and reach. Pam had crossed paths with him years ago, just enough to know he was brilliant, connected, and completely unafraid to bend or break the rules. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. If anyone could orchestrate a spy network within the U.S. legal system, it was him. Just the thought of it sent a chill through her bones. The architect wasn't just a nickname. It was a warning, a key to unraveling the layers of a conspiracy that had already swallowed half the system. Each new lead brought Pam closer to the truth and deeper into danger. It became clear this wasn't just a battle with a rogue corporation. She was up against hidden forces embedded within the government itself. Seneca Systems wasn't just a private intelligence firm. It was the face of a silent coup, a system of surveillance designed to monitor, manipulate, and control anyone who dared to stand in its way. And those people, they weren't just strangers in the shadows. Some were former allies, friends, people who had earned Pam's trust, only to betray her in the most devastating way. But Pam wasn't backing down, because if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was this: she wouldn't stop until the network was exposed and destroyed. Pam's investigation was no longer just about Reyes. It wasn't even just about Seneca. It had become a war of minds and morals against the puppet masters hiding behind courtroom walls. And with every revelation, Pam saw it clearly. This wasn't just about power. It was about control and erasing anyone who dared to defy it. When Pam Bondi received the official notice that she had been removed from the case, a cold wave of dread swept through her. The government had suspended her from the courtroom proceedings, but for Pam, this wasn't the end. It was a new path, a different angle in an investigation she could no longer walk away from. She had come too far, faced too many dangers, and uncovered too many secrets to simply back down. Those pulling the strings thought that by sidelining her, they could erase the trail, cover their tracks, and silence the truth. They were wrong. Pam wasn't the kind of woman who backed down under pressure. In her mind, there was only one resolution. Nothing would stop her from uncovering the truth. Isolated, cut off from official access, Pam turned to independent investigation. Working alone, she began combing through every file, every lead, every thread of evidence she had gathered before her suspension. Day after day, she sat in front of her computer, scanning audio recordings, cross-referencing intel, and piecing together clues like shards of a broken mirror. If the system wouldn't support her pursuit of justice, she would rely on the only tool she had left: her intellect, her instincts, and her unshakable determination. But the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. The Martin Reyes case wasn't the endgame. One afternoon, while sifting through encrypted files, she received a message from an unknown source. Just one line: "Emily Roberts, she knows something." Pam froze. The name wasn't familiar, but the urgency in the message hit like a siren in her gut. She launched a quick search. Emily Roberts, a young law student, had reportedly recorded a private meeting involving key members of Seneca Systems. The meeting could be a smoking gun, the key to exposing everything. But when Pam started asking questions about Emily, the answers were chilling. The girl had vanished. Witnesses said she was being hunted, and those behind the conspiracy weren't sparing anyone. A rush of dread surged through Pam. She couldn't let Emily fall into the hands of the very people trying to erase the truth. She had to find her first, fast, with the help of a few trusted allies, old friend from her days in the Justice Department. Pam traced Emily's last known movements. Every step put her closer to danger, but she didn't care. Emily was more than a witness now. She was a thread connected to something much bigger. Following Emily's trail, Pam began to see it all more clearly. Reyes was just the surface. The real operation was far more vast and insidious. Emily's recording, when matched with Pam's own evidence, painted a horrifying picture. Seneca Systems wasn't just meddling with one case. They were enacting a nationwide strategy. A quiet, calculated plan to infiltrate the court system from the inside out. Every trial, every ruling, every judgment, it was all part of a long-term blueprint to rewrite the rules of justice. Pam felt the weight of what she had uncovered pressing down on her, like the sky itself was collapsing. But she couldn't stop now. This wasn't just about Reyes. It wasn't even just about Emily. It was about the future of the entire justice system. If she gave up now, Seneca would win. They'd rewrite the law, erase accountability, destroy every ounce of public trust in the courts. No, that wasn't an option. This had become a war, and Pam was in the thick of it. She made a vow, not just to protect Emily, but to protect everything she had ever believed about law, justice, and the rule of truth. The danger was growing by the hour. The enemy wasn't just hiding in the courtroom anymore. They were buried deep within government, politics, society, operating in plain sight. And Pam Bondi was the only one left willing to drag them into the light. Pam Bondi stood on the stage of truth, and there was no turning back. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the computer screen, but her resolve never wavered. Everything she had uncovered, every document, every encrypted file, every whispered clue, was now ready to go public. And standing with her in this moment of reckoning was Cameron Knox, a renowned investigative journalist with over 5 million followers. Cameron wasn't just a media figure. He was a warrior for justice, someone who had risked his career and his reputation to expose the darkness festering beneath the surface of power. Together, they made the decision. They would bring the secrets of Seneca Systems into the light. This wasn't just about sharing information. It was an act of defiance, a challenge to a justice system that had been silently compromised. The world seemed to hold its breath as the live stream began. Pam sat in front of the camera, calm and composed on the outside, while anxiety surged through her chest. She opened her laptop and pressed go live. Within seconds, classified documents, audio files, and video recordings began pouring across the screen. Clear, undeniable proof of Seneca's secret meetings, covert financial transfers, and surveillance devices hidden in courtrooms. Nothing was blurred, nothing withheld. The response was immediate and explosive. The public was stunned. Investigative agencies could no longer look away. And in that moment, Pam knew there was no going back. She was no longer just a witness. She had become a whistleblower, a warrior, the voice of truth in a system built to silence it. But what Pam didn't expect was how quickly Seneca struck back. Within hours, the company launched a massive disinformation campaign aimed at destroying her credibility. They released doctored documents, false testimony, and fabricated evidence claiming Pam herself had planted the listening devices. They painted her as a rogue operative, a disgruntled insider framing them for her own agenda. And the worst part? People listened. The wildfire spread fast. Online forums, news outlets, even former colleagues, everyone had an opinion. Some hailed her as a hero. Others branded her a traitor. The internet had become a battlefield, and Pam was caught in the crossfire. She realized then that this war was no longer just against Seneca. It was a war against public perception, against the power of manipulated narratives. She wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting to keep the truth alive. Calls came in, angry ones. Messages from old friends, colleagues, even people she'd once fought for in court. Accusations, doubts, questions she never imagined she'd have to answer. And as the wave of outrage surged, Pam felt the creeping isolation of being utterly alone. But in that silence, something else emerged: resilience. A fire she hadn't known she had. Because Pam knew one thing. If she couldn't stand firm now, after everything she'd uncovered, she'd never be able to look herself in the mirror again. So she rose. She stepped out of the shadows of betrayal and into the storm of controversy. She refused to let Seneca control the narrative. And while the rumors raged and the character assassinations piled up, Pam held her ground. Because what she had done wasn't just for herself. It was for the justice system she had devoted her life to defending. She knew now that this wasn't just about exposing a conspiracy. It was about protecting the very soul of justice. Pam Bondi stood firm, not just because she believed in truth, but because she knew something deep in her bones. Once the truth is set free, no one, not even Seneca, can stop it. Pam Bondi stood on the stage of truth, and there was no turning back. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the computer screen, but her resolve never wavered. Everything she had uncovered, every document, every encrypted file, every whispered clue, was now ready to go public. And standing with her in this moment of reckoning was Cameron Knox, a renowned investigative journalist with over 5 million followers. Cameron wasn't just a media figure. He was a warrior for justice, someone who had risked his career and his reputation to expose the darkness festering beneath the surface of power. Together, they made the decision. They would bring the secrets of Seneca's systems into the light. This wasn't just about sharing information. It was an act of defiance, a challenge to a justice system that had been silently compromised. The world seemed to hold its breath as the live stream began. Pam sat in front of the camera, calm and composed on the outside, while anxiety surged through her chest. She opened her laptop and pressed go live. Within seconds, classified documents, audio files, and video recordings began pouring across the screen. Clear, undeniable proof of Seneca's secret meetings, covert financial transfers, and surveillance devices hidden in courtrooms. Nothing was blurred, nothing withheld. The response was immediate and explosive. The public was stunned. Investigative agencies could no longer look away. And in that moment, Pam knew there was no going back. She was no longer just a witness. She had become a whistleblower, a warrior, the voice of truth in a system built to silence it. But what Pam didn't expect was how quickly Seneca struck back. Within hours, the company launched a massive disinformation campaign aimed at destroying her credibility. They released doctored documents, false testimony, and fabricated evidence claiming Pam herself had planted the listening devices. They painted her as a rogue operative, a disgruntled insider framing them for her own agenda. And the worst part? People listened. The wildfire spread fast. Online forums, news outlets, even former colleagues, everyone had an opinion. Some hailed her as a hero. Others branded her a traitor. The internet had become a battlefield, and Pam was caught in the crossfire. She realized then that this war was no longer just against Seneca. It was a war against public perception, against the power of manipulated narratives. She wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting to keep the truth alive. Calls came in, angry ones. Messages from old friends, colleagues, even people she'd once fought for in court. Accusations, doubts, questions she never imagined she'd have to answer. And as the wave of outrage surged, Pam felt the creeping isolation of being utterly alone. But in that silence, something else emerged: resilience. A fire she hadn't known she had. Because Pam knew one thing. If she couldn't stand firm now, after everything she'd uncovered, she'd never be able to look herself in the mirror again. So she rose. She stepped out of the shadows of betrayal and into the storm of controversy. She refused to let Seneca control the narrative. And while the rumors raged and the character assassinations piled up, Pam held her ground. Because what she had done wasn't just for herself. It was for the justice system she had devoted her life to defending. She knew now that this wasn't just about exposing a conspiracy. It was about protecting the very soul of justice. Pam Bondi stood firm, not just because she believed in truth, but because she knew something deep in her bones. Once the truth is set free, no one, not even Seneca, can stop it. Pam Bondi could never have imagined that the very justice system she had devoted her entire life to defending could be corrupted so deeply. As she dug deeper into the operations of Seneca systems, the picture that emerged wasn't just dark, it was devastating. This wasn't just about Martin Reyes or even a few manipulated trials. No, what she uncovered was something far more insidious. Seneca wasn't infiltrating the system. They were trying to replace it. What Pam discovered wasn't merely a sophisticated surveillance network. It was something far more chilling, a parallel court system. A hidden, digital judiciary where critical legal decisions, verdicts, sentences, judicial actions, weren't being made by judges or juries, but by unseen power brokers behind screens. Wealthy financiers, corporate puppeteers, shadow figures with unlimited resources. There were no public laws here, no oversight, no accountability. Every ruling could be pre-written, every case manipulated, every defendant judged before they ever stepped into a courtroom. These weren't trials, they were scripted performances. Legal theater crafted to maintain the illusion of fairness, while justice was quietly hijacked in the background. Pam reeled as the full weight of it crashed down on her. Seneca wasn't just meddling in high-profile cases. They were building a replacement for the entire American legal system, one where every file, every proceeding, and every outcome could be remotely controlled, not by judges or lawyers, but by the highest bidder. And then came the deepest cut, Martin Reyes. Pam had spent months believing Reyes was a pawn, a manipulated insider, perhaps even a whistleblower trapped in a conspiracy beyond his control. She had fought to protect him. She had risked everything to bring justice to a man she thought was being crushed by the machine. But the puzzle pieces began to fall into place, and what they revealed left her shaken. Reyes wasn't just a victim. He was part of the design. His silence, his passive presence in the courtroom, his refusal to fight back. It wasn't fear. It was strategy, a deliberate move to keep attention focused elsewhere, to protect the ones pulling the real strings. Reyes had been positioned perfectly to mislead her, to mislead everyone. He was never on the outside of the game. He was one of its players. And now, Pam had to face the truth. She wasn't just battling Seneca. She had been manipulated by those she thought she was saving. It was a crushing realization. Not everyone was innocent. Not every victim was truly a victim. And in this war for justice, the lines between good and evil, right and wrong, were no longer so clear. With these revelations, Pam wasn't just fighting to expose a company. She was staring down an entire shadow system, one built on deception, maintained by wealth, and protected by lies. And even worse, she was now forced to question everything she once believed. Every ally, every assumption, every instinct. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because Pam Bondi now understood that justice wasn't just about exposing secrets. It was about exposing everyone who had used the system to serve themselves. Whether they wore suits or robes, worked in boardrooms or courtrooms, it didn't matter. If they were part of this conspiracy, they were part of the problem. And she would face them all. The battle ahead was larger than she'd ever imagined. There would be no exit, no clean ending. But Pam had one goal, and it had never been clearer. Tear down the parallel justice system that Seneca had built and return power to the truth, no matter the cost. Pam Bondi stood in the pale light of her study, her eyes locked on the computer screen, her heart pounding. But her resolve was stronger than ever. She knew that once she hit go live, there would be no turning back. This wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of war against a machine far more powerful and insidious than she'd ever imagined. Before her were the documents, the recordings, the covert videos, evidence that exposed the darkest secrets of Seneca's systems. And with one click, Pam wouldn't just be a witness. She would become a whistleblower, the voice of truth in a world drowning in manipulation. As the live stream began, Pam looked directly into the camera. Her voice was steady, but each word carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, 1,000 buried truths. This wasn't just the climax of an investigation. It was a rallying cry for justice, for accountability, for the people. While institutions and officials scrambled to protect the powerful, Pam chose to confront them, live and unfiltered. "The truth can't stay buried forever," she said. And with that, she unleashed it all. She laid bare Seneca's manipulation of courtroom decisions. She exposed their digital courtroom system, where verdicts were scripted and outcomes bought. But more than that, she asked the question that shook the nation. Who gets to define justice? This wasn't just about a case, or even a conspiracy. This was about power, about freedom, about who controls the truth in a world built on carefully curated lies. The public reaction was seismic. Pam's story reverberated across the country. Investigations were launched. Hidden networks began to unravel. Names once protected by wealth and influence were suddenly dragged into the light. The Department of Justice was forced to act. People who thought they were untouchable began to feel the grip of accountability closing in. But Pam also learned something else. Not everyone wants the truth. Seneca struck back, fast and vicious. They spread lies, altered narratives, tried to destroy her reputation. Social media filled with doubt, accusations, fake headlines. But Pam stood her ground. She had done what she came to do. And somewhere along the way, she realized justice wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about fighting for who gets to tell the story. It was about reclaiming the narrative from those who had controlled it for far too long. As investigations deepened and power began to shift, Pam quietly stepped back. There was no grand farewell, no victory speech. She moved into a modest house just outside the city, far from the spotlight. She faded from public view, but she didn't feel like she had lost. Not at all, because she knew something had begun. Pam had cracked open a door that could never again be closed. The wave of change she set in motion couldn't be stopped. Others would walk through that door. Whistleblowers, truth seekers, citizens tired of being silenced. And justice, real justice, would start to take root again. She lived in the shadows now, but her conscience was clear, and her message rang louder than any courtroom verdict. Justice cannot be bought. It cannot be rewritten, and it belongs, always, to the people. Pam understood that her fight had never been about her alone. It had always been about all of us. And while she no longer stood on the front lines, her actions would echo through history. Because in the end, the question she left the world with would never fade. Who decides what justice is? Pam Bondi's story ends here, but its impact lives on. A reminder to every citizen, every courtroom, every whisper in the dark. The truth always finds the light.